They're going to create markets. They're going to allow for other countries to have a single policy toward the Maghreb instead of having to tailor economic policies for Morocco, for Tunisia, for Algeria. They can do it for the region, and all those countries will then benefit.
I would contest this idea and say that where is the leverage for change in the Maghreb region? If you didn't have some kind of balance between the strong and the weak, you won't have a leverage for change because the weak states will be pushed by the stronger states. So you can't just create economic benefits out of a vacuum, and there is a vacuum in the Maghreb region. How do you expect these states to become stronger when there isn't actually anywhere to start from? You're starting from a vacuum. There are no markets to start from.
And that's why we have to have a union, because in every country there are different resources. In Tunisia, there are some skills that we can use.
How will you guarantee that they won't dispute over resources and you won't actually go into a political dispute?
Because they complement each other,
right,
rather than dispute.
But you're assuming that they will overcome national differences and they will overcome political differences that they're right now trying to figure out. The region is extremely unstable right now.
The EU was able to overcome these differences, even though their differences were much higher than the ones in the
But they
Arab
overcame them
countries,
before they started the EU. They had already become each other's highest trading partners before they started the EU. They just built on what was already there. But there's nothing in North Africa, in the Maghreb region, to build on. It's creating it through an economic union.
I think what we're arguing though is that each country has things to offer, but they might lack in other areas. So why not pull all resources together so they can do together what they couldn't do alone? And that's the basis
Why do
of our
they need an
idea.
economic union to do that though anyway?
Because individually they will not be able to compete on a global market, as together in a union they will be able to.
But that was the motivation. They had just come off of these disastrous world wars, and they wanted to prevent that from happening again.
At the same time, you have the similar motivation, I would argue, with the Arab Springs. You have mass political instability in the region. This is one opportunity, one solution. If you help each other overcome this economic instability and this political instability, it can improve the entire region as a whole, more so than that they could do individually, just like France and Germany did after the war.
But the situation is not ripe enough. It's simply too immature right now to talk about a union when countries like Libya and Tunisia just came out and just, they dissolved.
And that's why they need each other to help each other out.
But what happens when one government is weaker than another? What happens then to the union?
Sure.
I also think
look at Mauritania. Look at Mauritania. Look at Morocco, and look at Algeria. These haven't had any changes in their regimes. How do you expect regimes like that, who are very close?
Morocco's big changes right now,
but not as big as Libya and not as big as Morocco and Tunisia.
But maybe Morocco doesn't need as many of those changes. The Moroccan people are overly satisfied with the changes that happen.
But you are expecting that, you are already thinking that these governments already agreed to open up like that. I mean, how Mauritania, a country so closed up as Mauritania, would not accept to open up economically because they fear they will actually lose power.
I think with the Arab Spring, we have learned that governments are ready to change, and the people, if they want the governments to change, that they will change.
But they have the power.
I also think that you guys are addressing the problems that might generate from a union, rather than discussing why we shouldn't have the union as itself. There are problems, and that's why we are modeling it after the EU. That's why we're learning from the lessons. That's why we will adopt to a better union.
When the case it is
but
now.
we've seen the effects. We've seen what's happened when countries have tried to go unilaterally, and it hasn't worked. So why not consider joining those countries together into an economic union where they can actually compete globally?
Because you can't guarantee that they're actually going to be more competitive globally. Because you're saying that you're going to create markets, but create markets where?
That's time. Now what we're going to do is have a 3-minute prep period, and then that will be followed by 4 minutes of open conclusion, where both teams get a chance to make their concluding remarks. 3 minutes preparation.
I think you said two things. Do you agree with what they're arguing?
And we're arguing that if they're better off and become together economically.
Okay, that's time. Now what we're going to do in this 4 minutes is an open 4 minutes of time in which you can attempt to appeal for the decision in the debate. You want to try and focus the arguments, try to crystallize the arguments, show where the other side perhaps didn't respond to a point that you made and why that's an important argument in the debate. So we can go ahead and start the 4 minutes, and it's open for anybody to get started with the summations.
Who do you want to go first?
Either side.
So we believe that there's a blind assumption that just being in a union will magically dissolve all the problems that already exist, including the political and the economic ones. But the prospect for this happening hasn't been proven. That there's such a large possibility for it to only further destabilize the region rather than actually strengthening them. We also believe that economic unions are only built on existing trade relations and existing markets, which don't exist in the Maghreb Union. In the EU, they already had the markets in place. They were just strengthening them and bringing them to each other. But they're not. Yes, they have resources, but they don't have the markets in place, the infrastructure in place to actually bring them successfully to each other. They only strengthen economies, not build them. And since Libya and Tunisia are in such a vulnerable place right now, what they really do need to be doing is building their economy. They've pretty much gone down to the bottom. They've scratched it all. So they need to be building it, but they can't do that through an economic union. They have to build their economy first before they can come together.
First thing you said is that there's no guarantee that the economic union is going to work in any way. But I think the EU has proven it. We had a bunch of countries that came from political turmoil, world war actually, which is much worse than the Arab Spring that we observed. And they were able to put their views together, focus on what was the most important, and they came up with what we know together as the successful European Union. Second, you said that the countries in the Maghreb don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the market like the EU already had, like to build a union. But that's exactly the point. Will they be better off if they continue struggling together like they are doing now? Can't they create this market by becoming allied with each other? And we proved that when you make an economic union, because of trade barriers that come down and prices that decrease, those countries that didn't have any absolute advantage now have comparative advantage in those partner countries, which means you can trade. And and also because you have now a unified region, which is not made of one single country, but of 5 countries, you create a bigger market that is much more attractive to foreign trade.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to both teams. I'm going to take just a few moments to summarize how I see the debate. And I first want to congratulate both teams on listening to each other. I thought that was really good. Sometimes, you have one team listening and wanting to speak, and they don't listen to the other side. And empathy is a part to play in debates. So I think in some cases it's not a bad thing at all to agree with a point that the other side makes. That can not only help in the long run of the debate, but it can also, in the perception of your audience, create sort of an empathy there for them to hear more of your arguments. I think that both teams should have probably spent more time looking at the word model. There's a role of definitions in debate, and if you read that definition, you can use it for the benefit of your arguments. What does it mean, for example, to model after the EU? Well, what I was hearing at the first part of the debate was a lot about Greece, which is logical to bring up with all the news that's going on about the current problems of the EU. But it's also good to look at history too, and go way back into history, not just at the end of World War II, but what happened in the 1950s as the EU evolved from a coal and steel community to a common market to an economic union. So there's a way that both sides can look at that word modeling and use it to their advantage. What does that really mean? It could mean that in the context of the current EU, yeah, they've got a lot of problems. But yes, at the same time, they've had 50 years of relative success, And that can be a factor to take into account. But it was, most of you have not even met, and you came in here and did this debate today, and I'm really, really pleased with how you performed. I hate to make a decision, but I have to. And I'm going to give the debate slightly to the team from Tunis, the side representing the pro, because I think they were pretty consistent in their ability to argue that the EU has overcome some of the difficulties and that there is a potential for them to overcome the good argument that the team from Seuss made about a vacuum in the Maghreb. Basically what it comes down to is why not give it a try. There's one other point that I think both teams could have looked at too, is that there has been an economic union in the Maghreb. It was formed in the past. There is some track history to this phenomenon being done, and there's a mixed record of success there, which both teams I think could have used to increase the ability to persuade on their side. But I think it was very good arguments about the troubled current state of affairs with Libya, with Tunisia, but I think that the pro side was just a little bit more persuasive in terms of arguing that it could be potentially something significant that's worth trying. In other words, advantages outweigh disadvantages. But great job to both teams. I really appreciate what you did. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this demonstration of the Con-style debating format. For more information regarding the 2012 USA-Tunisia debates or other projects of USA Youth Debates, please contact